Ashley Barlow. I am the president of the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati, and I am also a special education attorney. I am licensed in Kentucky and Ohio. And the DSAGC asked me if I could talk a little bit about the impact of the coronavirus on special education. And so I've got a little board behind me that kind of talks about what we are going to discuss today. So the title is The Impact of the Coronavirus on Special Education. The first thing we'll talk about is the guidance that we received from the United States Department of Education. The second thing is the response from the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates, which we call COPA. COPA is the leading advocacy organization for parents, attorneys, and advocates of children with special education services in schools. Then we will talk about what the Office of Civil Rights has said about bullying relative to coronavirus specifically. And then I've got, 4 additional questions on the list. What if I am overwhelmed? What if I am underwhelmed? What happens to special education meetings? And how can I be proactive? I know that this is probably backwards for you because I'm filming this in selfie mode, but I put it up here as guidance for myself and then for you in case you want to fast forward to something very specific. So the United States Department of Education did put out some guidance a few days ago about school closures, and the guidance really was reasonable. You know, the standard was, well, schools have to do what is reasonable. And there are very specific questions in there with very specific answers. So that is a good resource to go to. If you have a specific question, the DSAGC can put that on our Facebook page. We can try to put that on the resources page on our website. And certainly you can find it on the Department of Education's website. However, COPA responded to the U.S. Department of Education's publication and said, gosh, we don't know that we necessarily agree with what the Department of Education has put out there. In fact, we think that it conflicts with the law in several cases or in several instances. And so what COPA has said is that if schools are closed for a temporary time, so COPA thinks that that is probably about 10 days, 2 weeks of closure, then that is not considered a change of placement. So 2 weeks, not a change of placement. Schools have very little obligation to provide you, to provide your child or your loved one with any services. Closures that last more than 10 days are probably considered a change of placement. And as you know, probably, a change of placement comes with a lot of obligations on the school district's part. So most importantly, I think most of us parents, I'm also the parent of a child that has Down syndrome. He's a wild and crazy 9-year-old named Jack. And I'm certainly concerned about continuing along with not only his education, but also with his related services. And so what COPA has said is that if schools are closed long enough for a change of placement to be considered, then schools are obligated to provide some kind of specially designed instruction. That might be by way of instructional packets, phone calls from teachers, internet-based lessons like iExcel. I think I spelled that incorrectly on here, if you can even see it backwards. It's kind of ironic that I spelled that incorrectly. Video conferencing, that sort of thing. You're also entitled to your related services, OT, PT, and speech, and behavior supports. Whatever is in your child's IEP, if you have a change of placement, then you are entitled to those services in a different setting. So kind of think about it, I think, if you want to think about it reasonably, as though your child were sick and were home for a long time. So, maybe we think about, I don't know, some kind of pneumonia or something from which your child will recover. They're home. And so maybe the school sends a tutor to your home, or maybe the school sends the physical therapist to your home. Music therapy can continue in your home, that sort of thing. We'll talk a little bit later about what happens if that overwhelms you, or if the services that they offer underwhelm you. I know in my district, something kind of in between is happening right now. We are at a 10-day closure right now, and so that would not be considered technically a change of placement, probably. And you're hearing me say probably, technically, because this has never happened. This is untested. We don't know what courts would do. So certainly I don't want to be the first due process case against a district, because I want to see what a court's going to do before I use my time and my stress and my energy to file something. But regardless of that, what my district is doing is we're closed for 10 days right now, but we are doing non-traditional instruction. And so my child's special education teacher has sent home learning packets and some additional resources, morning work resources, and ideas about how to test for spelling goals and how to instruct spelling words during the week and that sort of thing. I did check, and I think this is a good tip, I did check to make sure that the things that are being sent home align with my child's goals. So if your child has a goal about the clock, then you want to make sure that what is sent home matches up with the clock, the time, learning an analog clock or learning a digital clock. Same thing with money, one-to-one correspondence, all of those math goals. You want to make sure that the goals line up with, or that the instruction lines up with your child's goals, because your child is entitled to that specially designed instruction, and the goals are there for a reason. So that's probably all we need to say about what COPA said, except that what the other big piece of that is, well, what happens if we don't get that? If we don't get specially designed instruction at home, if we don't get related services, what happens if it's impracticable? And the answer to that is compensatory education. So if a district fails to meet its obligation in an IEP in any time, regardless of whether the coronavirus is happening, then the district has to provide compensatory education. Sometimes that is extra minutes. So a district will say, oh, well, we can provide extra time after school or on Saturdays or in the summer, that sort of thing, in order to make up the time that we lost, because we acknowledge that we were supposed to have provided these services. Sometimes that comes by way of money. The district says, gosh, there's no way that we can provide that service, and so we're going to offer you this amount of money in order for you to go out and get intervention. I would suspect that the claims would be more likely to succeed right now if with an offer of compensatory time, because the coronavirus epidemic is not making schools unable to deliver goals by way of their skill level, or to deliver results by their skill level. So it's not like you have to go to some kind of specialized school in most cases. But of course, every case has different scenarios. So that's something that you would want to consider specifically to your child's case. Moving on to what the Office of Civil Rights has said. So the Office of Civil Rights did publish something saying that children that are bullied, regardless of their special education needs, but children that are in protected classes that are bullied as a result of the coronavirus, will have protections in the OCR. And I think most of that relates to children that are of ethnicities where the coronavirus has originated. So people of Asian descent, I think, are experiencing bullying. But then something that I think has come up just in the last couple of days is also bullying of children online and some of these like web chat meetups that districts are setting up. And so is that happening as a result of a child's disability that's related to the coronavirus? I can suspect that the OCR would provide some protection for that as well. So the remedy there is filing a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and that can be done online. If you need to file a compensatory education claim, just backing back up to the change of placement for a long closure, if you need to file a comp ed claim, that's done by due process. And I don't think those can be done online in Ohio. They certainly cannot in Kentucky. But there are guidelines on how to fill out the complaints or how to draft your own complaint on both states' Department of Education websites. Okay, so what do I do if I'm overwhelmed? I'm overwhelmed right now. I'll tell you, I think a lot of us are. In my case, I think one of the reasons that I'm overwhelmed is because I'm having to check in with my child's general education class, with my child's special education class. The teachers are FaceTiming me. His instructional assistants are checking in with him, and he has to respond to all of that. And I understand the teachers have to work and the kids have to learn, but oh my gosh, is it ever a lot? And then I'm trying to work also. And so, I think the solution, in my case, just from a parenting perspective, the solution is to have a schedule, have some structure to it. I think that's really helped us. But from a special education standpoint, here's the deal is the law is based on reason. The law is based on what is considered reasonable. What would an ordinary prudent man do under the same set of circumstances? And so if you've got several children at home, if your child has complex medical needs, if you are working in a field where you are having to work extra hours, or you're trying to multitask a lot, or anything like that, know that you're probably going to be protected. I think that truancy officers are going to have to be as reasonable against us as we are against school districts in delivering compensatory education. So if you don't check in and your child is considered absent, well, I hope they still get into college is the way that I look at it. I just don't think that their lack of participation or their minimized participation during this time is going to be reasonably needled by a school district. I don't think that we're going to be held all that accountable for what we do, so long as we put forth a reasonable effort. But I think the most important thing to do is to not say, well, I'm not doing this, and to stop, right? I think the most important thing to do is to communicate, to immediately contact your child's teacher. And I don't just mean teacher, I mean general education teachers, special education teachers, related service professionals, PTs, OTs, principal, director of special education, in some cases, maybe even the superintendent or a building representative, or whatever that team looks like for you. Contact the entire team and say, hey, listen, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I am feeling overwhelmed, and I suggest that we do this. Or in some cases, some people say, my child isn't working for me. How do I get my child to work for me? This is a totally new setting, a totally new environment, and this is really, really hard for me. And so I think the answer to that is to just be reasonable, to try to find something that works for both the district and you, and it's going to take a lot of communication. What do I do if I feel underwhelmed? What if my district isn't sending stuff? What if my district is sending stuff that doesn't match up with my child's goals, etc.? My suggestion would be that you first go and pull out that IEP document and just write down what your child's goals are. And then next to each of the goals, write down what the specially designed instruction is supposed to be. If your child has significant reading needs and is supposed to get a multi-sensory research-based reading program like Orton Gillingham or Linda Mood Bell or something, and you can't deliver that, well, then you've got a problem. If it's longer than 10 days, you are looking at a change of placement, and you need compensatory education for those things, because for those to be implemented with fidelity, they have to have, a certain number of minutes per week in order for that to work. So, sometimes it's something that you just can't meet the specially designed instruction. But I think first you need to go through your child's goals so that you've got a check mark, right? You never enter a meeting without a list of this is what I'm looking for. So what I would do is I would write, what I have done is written down my child's goals. And then I actually also pulled my child's data so that I could look to see how his teachers are monitoring his goals. So one of his goals is CVC words. He's blending words like cat and dog and those kinds of words. And so I needed to see how many I give him when I test him. And then I looked at the specially designed instruction to see if I thought that I could deliver it at home with the materials that they had sent me. There were a couple of things that I've gotten from clients that clients have said, gosh, my kid's got this goal and they aren't getting materials for it. Well, then you communicate. Again, we always are going to go back to communicate. You write and say, and I would say very positive, because teachers are doing the same thing that we're doing. They're exhausted also, multitasking, parenting their own children, making big decisions about their kids' weddings and their kids' and their families' vacations and that kind of stuff. We're all stressed and thinking about other things in addition to education. So what I would do is I would communicate though and keep a nice professional tone and say, I appreciate the information that you sent for goals 1, 4, and 5. However, I didn't see anything for goal 2 and 3, and I'm wondering how I can support that at home. Something like that. You can also suggest some strategies. You can say something like, I wonder if we could video conference and see if that would work. Or I heard that there's something called Teachers Pay Teachers, which is an excellent website that does have some free materials, but everything else is very reasonably priced. And say, I wonder if you've got any materials saved that you could share with me. I don't know if that's allowed on Teachers Pay Teachers, but maybe your teachers modified it to a way that they could share it, something like that. I think the bottom line is to communicate. And ultimately, again, if you are underwhelmed and feel like your district has not met its obligation to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education and to provide your child with that specially designed instruction, then you're probably looking at a due process claim. And I would imagine that there will be far more due process claims filed this spring, summer, and fall than in years past in all 50 states. Okay, what happens to meetings is the next thing. I have had, I think, 4 ARC and IEP meetings this week. They've all happened really beautifully with technology. Some people are using Google's chat device. Zoom is another company that people are using if you want to suggest that to your district. And I think Microsoft has something called Microsoft Teams. I've not yet used that one. But they're happening. We have to offer people a lot of grace. Some people are on their cell phones, dogs are barking, kids are crying. My kid walked into an IEP meeting today. My kid also locked his brother out of the basement last week or yesterday when I was in a mediation on a conference call upstairs. So, I think we have to offer grace, but they are happening. If your district does not have an IEP within the certain amount of time, within the amount of time that is necessary, then you have a claim if you choose to make any kind of claim by way of a due process complaint or something like that. That's, again, just something that you'll want to be reasonable about, but also make sure that your child's rights are protected. Let's see. And then how can I be proactive? So the first thing I've got on there is communicate. That goes with document, right? So if you communicate something and the district says, yes, we will do that, then I would send an email and say, thank you so much for taking my call today. As we discussed, you are going to send me these Orton Gillingham resources. I very much appreciate that. Thank you. That kind of thing. Or I asked for in Gillingham resources and you indicated that those weren't being used or something like that, so that you've got that documented, and you can protect your child that way. Like I said in my prior example, I would actually try to take data at home. I think it really helps to have that consistency. I mean, if anything, we're testing how our kids are doing across different environments, right? We need kids to generalize their skills from school to home and from home to elsewhere in the community. And so, try to take data. We all test differently. We all prompt differently. Like something that I've noticed is I am terrible about giving verbal prompts. I mean, I'm constantly saying, keep coloring, keep coloring, keep coloring. And my kid's got a goal to do stuff without so many darn prompts. And so I probably ought to try to be a little bit more quiet so that he could be a little more independent. But that is proving difficult for me, right? And so, but that's that's a great example of why it's really important to look at his IEP, because now my child is getting one-on-one instruction all the time without peers, without distractions, and I don't want to cause any terrible habits that it will make it hard for him to re-generalize back into school. Let's see, record other thoughts. As I've been working with my child, he's been home for about a week because he was sick last week. I've just kept a little index card on my kitchen table. So, just kind of weird things. Like I've decided to schedule 2 doctor's appointments. He's closing one eye when he looks at his work, and I'm like, I think we need to get back to the eye doctor. And that kind of thing. I've also noticed that my child takes ADHD medicine, and whereas this summer when I worked with him, he could work up until a certain time. Now the time is earlier, so I think he's metabolizing his medicine a little bit faster. But you can make other comments or thoughts that you might want to communicate to the school team. So, I used to be able to cut on the line, and now we aren't cutting in curved lines, that kind of stuff. Just to see if the school team has any thoughts, any suggestions, or any yeah, but if you tell them this, then this will happen, that kind of thing. So I think it's important to take data, record any other thoughts that you have, etc. And then the last thing that I have is be reasonable, right? And we talked about that. I think all of this is going to fall within the umbrella of reason. And so some people are going to have slam dunk, really sad situations that are absolute due process cases. And some people are just going to need to have some hard discussions with their district. Other people are already probably saying thank you, you're amazing, and oh my gosh, this is better than I ever dreamt it could be to their districts. And most of us are going to fall someplace in the middle of that. So I think we need to be reasonable. In my office, my tagline is reason, respect, and grace. So the reason part is the law, and I always tell people, I'm constantly advising people where I think a judge is going to be. In this case, again, we've never had circumstances like this so globally. Of course, there have been natural disasters. So we have earthquakes and tornadoes and that sort of thing that'll close schools down. And we can look to those states for guidance. But by and large, we haven't had these kinds of widespread closures. So we don't really know what a court's going to do on a change of placement compensatory education case right now. But, if I say, I think the court's going to land between here and here, and it's gray in between, then I advise my clients within that, I call the shadow of the law, within that gray period. The respect part is pretty obvious. It's just the way that I choose to maintain myself while I am advocating for my clients. And grace, and that's where the real reason, where the real advocacy comes in. And that's just acknowledging that people have other things going on and other stresses and other circumstances, but we'll try to gracefully get to a path where we can get to a yes. Where we can get to some kind of agreement and something that works for both the child and for the district, right? And sometimes that's saying, I call it building a golden bridge, saying, hey, I've got just the idea for you and I think that this will work. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it's got to be a little bit more conflictual, but conflict yields positive change. And so that is also a strategy that works. I did write down here, and I bet you can't see it, one resource that I think is really great, in addition to the Department of Education's publications, which now I think number 3, and the COPA response. I'm certain that more is coming from COPA in the near future, so I would keep an eye out for that. But I have a colleague who's a friend that I've met at national conferences. His name is Jeff Forte, Forte. He's got a really great podcast that he's just now outrolling, whatever you say. And it is called Let's Talk SPED Law, SPED, Special Education, SPED, Let's Talk SPED Law. He did a podcast about a lot of this stuff. I think he published it yesterday. I thought it was excellent. I'm posting a fair amount on my website, Meyer and Barlow Law Firm. Meyer is spelled MEI as in igloo, ER. And of course, the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati is a wonderful resource as well. So I wish you peace and, most importantly, health, or as importantly, health. I don't know that that's more important than peace, but I wish you peace and health, and certainly reach out to the DSAGC with any questions, any concerns. We've got all kinds of protocols in place to make sure that we continue to meet your needs. Thank you.